What was once called a conspiracy theory, but is now known as true today. Harvey Weinstein sexually assaults many upcoming Hollywood stars. Was such an open secret, it was constantly referenced in media, way before the number hashtag movement. Which basket would you put Roman Polanski in? He drugged and raped a 13-year-old and was still lauded and feted by Hollywood. Or Woody Allen, who married his adopted daughter? Or Jimmy Savile in the UK? I would say the bad basket. Phew, thanks for clarifying. Yeah, all are bad, but Jimmy Savile was a whole different level of monster. He got away with far too much because of who he was, and in particular his personality, which was eccentric to say the best. Another thing, but in the UK, Jimmy Savile was by far and away the most famous. Everybody knew who Jimmy Savile was, and there was a huge amount of cognitive dissonance around any rumors. Hillsborough disaster in England 1989. Bad crowd management at a football match by the police. Overcrowding led to a crush with 97 dead and 766 injured. The police covered up their responsibility and blamed the fans until a second report in 2016 held the police responsible. The police briefed the press that Liverpool fans were wholly responsible, accusing us of being drunk, acting violent, and reporting that we robbed the dead and pissed on police who were trying to help the injured. The Sun ran with the infamous The Truth headline. For a quarter of a century, we were considered wholly responsible for it. And the Sun doesn't get sold in Liverpool anymore for some odd reason. If anyone else is reading the above comment and thinking it must be an exaggeration that a national newspaper would be boycotted across an entire large city of over 3 decades, it is not. Shops that sell it get shamed and boycotted. We don't about, we don't buy the Sun, and we don't vote Tory. Sexual abuse of children was being covered up by the Catholic Church. Or, if you want something lighter, gorillas used to be cryptids and were not a properly recognized species until 1902. MK Ultra. Basically, they were doing a bunch of experiments using various devices, drugs, and psychological tactics to try to determine if mind control is real in any way. I believe the results were mixed, to say the least. Like, one story I know of is one test subject of MK Ultra merely got his beliefs torn down by an interrogator and went on to become the Unabomber. He didn't just get his beliefs torn down. He was routinely mentally and emotionally abused in that program for hours at a time. We're talking about domestic torture on a university campus. The LSD was just an instrument they were hoping could speed up the process of tearing down a person and turning them into an unthinking military drone. Problem is, hallucinogenic drugs don't help people become mindless, order-taking killers like they were hoping for. It rather made them indifferent to organized institutions and made them feel more connected to people at a human level. So, when the results weren't going the direction they thought, they doubled down on the abuse until it was over. So you have an incredibly smart guy like Ted, who sees the same thing so many countless others see when they have these big trips. That post-industrial revolution society has in fact ruined the planet and caused mass extinction events and altered ourselves to an incredible degree, and that there's an urge to connect with all living people. And when you go through countless hours, or the kind of torture he endured, you can see why it's easy to lose hope for change and to resort to extremes because it seems the only way to bring attention to your story. I'm not justifying him or what he did, but the more we learn about how sick our society has gotten, how generational abuse has ruined us, how society is crushing us, the easier it is to see why he did it. The UK not cleaning up properly after their nuclear tests in Australia. I read a pretty good interview with an indigenous guy who saw a test. It was really upsetting. They were so awed by the explosion, and then they ran into a load of dead kangaroos. They thought the gods had blessed them with food, but after eating the kangaroos, they fell victim to radiation poisoning. I don't know if any studies have been done about cancer and birth defect rates in those communities, but I can only assume it was horrible. As an Australian, I can almost guarantee no government since has put money into finding that information out. Tuskegee Syphilis Study. From 1932 to 1972, the U.S. Public Health Service conducted a study on the natural progression of untreated syphilis in rural African American men in Alabama, under the guise of free health care, without their informed consent. The men were not told they had syphilis, nor were they treated for it even after penicillin became the standard treatment in 1947. This should be required learning in history class, along with the Tulsa Massacre of 1921. A lot of people grow up clueless about race relations in the US, aside from slavery and a very sanitized version of the civil rights movement. I work in clinical research, and the Tuskegee experiment is the first example they use of how not to do medical research in every research ethics training course. The fact that Japanese citizens had disappeared because North Korea had kidnapped them. One of the victims was 13 when she was kidnapped. Her parents devoted the rest of their lives to reunite with their daughter, but the dad passed away a few years ago without ever getting the chance to see her again. His passing was pretty big news at the time. The kidnappings are still an ongoing issue since some of the victims are believed to be alive in North Korea. Edit clarified that both parents were heavily involved with trying to get their daughter back, but that the dad died recently, adding more details below. As some people have mentioned, the 13-year-old's name is Megumi Yokota, and she is from the area of Niigata, which is on the Sea of Japan side. The abducted Japanese citizens were ordinary people that were used to teach Japanese to North Korean spies for them to blend in. In Megumi Yokota's case, it's hypothesized that she might have witnessed some secret North Korean activity, and so she was kidnapped to stay quiet. If that's the case, it makes a little sense why North Korea returned other Japanese citizens, but not her, and insists that she's dead. There was a North Korean spy, Kim Hyun-hui, who defected after a botched bombing of a Korean Airlines flight in Bahrain, and she confessed to being taught by one of the abductees, Yaeko Taguchi. Taguchi was a single mom of a 3- and 1-year-old who was kidnapped after dropping her kids off at a daycare. She was 22 years old. Taguchi was forced to teach Japanese to the North Korean spy, and it's reported that she often wept when talking about how much she missed her kids. The Japanese government officially recognizes 17 people abducted. However, the National Police Agency recognizes 871 missing person cases from the period when the kidnappings occurred, where abduction cannot be ruled out. We may never find out exactly how many people were kidnapped since North Korea is unlikely to confess ever again. Someone also pointed out that Japan is not the only country to be victimized. South Korea has the unfortunate title of having the most abduction cases at around 3,800. However, I'm not as familiar with those cases. That during the 60s and 70s, between 25% and 50% of the Native American women population in the US were forcibly and unknowingly sterilized when using the free government-provided health care known as Indian Health Services. In North Carolina, you could face involuntary sterilization if you were mentally ill all the way up until the late 1970s, genocide via eugenics, direct extermination via war, or withholding food would be noticed during the 60s and 70s. Forced sterilizations would accomplish extermination minus the direct murder over a slightly longer time frame. The descendant organizations that built and owned the Titanic denied it broke in half while sinking until the wreck was found in 2 pieces. I have no idea why. None of the original engineers or proprietors were still around. But as recent as the late 1970s and early 80s, survivors who said it broke were dismissed as suffering from delusions brought on by hyperthermia. Despite no direct involvement, the contemporary lineage of White Star and Harland and Wolff were adamant there was absolutely no way it could have broke the way it did. Then Ballard found it, and the denial never spoke of it again. Part of the reason nobody believed the survivors is because it would not have been crystal clear on the night of the sinking, and there were some mixed reports because of the poor visibility, and how a survivor already in a lifeboat may have seen it versus one in the water. What we see in the Cameron film is lit up well for cinema. In reality, while the water and weather were otherwise calm, they were mostly looking at an enormous silhouette against a dark sky. In the middle of the ocean, with no other light source, the ship lights did remain on for a long time, but not the last few minutes or so where the confusion was. Combined with screaming and the cacophony coming from the ship itself, the debris floating around, things and people falling off of it, etc., Some people could very clearly see a ship breaking in half, and others couldn't figure out their ass from their elbows. What's worse is that it was an open secret at H&W that the ship was by no means unsinkable. It was a media sensationalism thing about its technology that they just didn't deny. The bulkheads didn't rise high enough to prevent the spillage that actually contributed to the rapid sinking, a choice made because of cost and cabin availability, design. Lots of weird shit went on with it once she was launched in terms of management and operations. The whole thing was a shit show from inception to sinking. That time, the United States military conducted secret chemical testing on unsuspecting residents of a predominantly black and low-income housing complex in St. Louis. The Pruitt-Ego housing development was one of a number of sites across the U.S. chosen for testing where the Army would release particles of zinc-cadmium sulfide, prolonged or repeated exposure to which can cause cancer and damage to internal organs. True story. Ask my cancer. From 1952 through 1969, the Army dropped thousands of pounds of zinc-cadmium sulfide in nearly 300 secret experiments conducted in such places as Fort Wayne, Indiana, 1964-66, St. Louis, 1953-65, San Francisco, 1964-68, Corpus Christi, 1962, and Oceanside, California, 1967. June 25, 2014. I used to tell people they were releasing updates to slow our phones down on purpose so that we'd have to go out and buy new ones. They told me I was paranoid and that my phone was slowing down because it was just getting old. That's not how processors work. Eventually, they officially got caught and tried to spin it off as we're doing it to save your battery life. Now it's just accepted, and you're supposed to throw out your phone and buy a new one every 3 years indefinitely. Yay, capitalism! Once my phone hits the 3-year mark, I stop updating the iOS altogether. They've gotten me too many times. I'll get a new one when I'm good and ready, darn it. I'm from Argentina, and there were rumors about a Chinese military base in the province. After some time, it turned out to be true. There is a Chinese base here in Argentina. Don't ask me what they are doing here. Edit. I thought it was a rumor. It seems that it was news at the moment. Still at the moment, everyone around me thought that it was a rumor too. Also, the Chinese base is in New Ken if you want to search it. Britney Spears was being held in an illegal and immoral conservatorship by her father, who essentially sold her off to a corporation in exchange for some of his debts. She was being drugged to keep her submissive, her children held against her, and forced to work incredibly long hours with no say and no time off, slavery, while her entire family stole and then lived off the money she earned. Since her social media was controlled by this conservator institution, she sent hidden messages to her fans begging for help. At some point, she posted about taking some time off since her father was having health problems, but that wasn't her. It was posted by her conservatorship team to hide the fact she was being kept for months in solitary confinement against her will. Thatcher wanted to destroy the miners' union. I don't think that was ever a conspiracy theory. It was pretty plain to see. What people failed to grasp is that the miners' union was simply the front line of a project to neuter all unions in the UK, and, by extension, working-class bargaining and organization. That was the conspiracy theory that turned out to be correct. Pitiful wage growth, food banks, failing public services, and inequality are the product of this now. The project reached far beyond the miners' strike via privatization, cuts in the welfare state, right to buy, etc., etc. Some dead Argentines and persecuted homosexuals propped up the entire rotten enterprise. But there's still very few people in mainstream politics who will call it for how it is. Lots of lip service, though. Lots and lots of lip service. It's commonly accepted as true that the murderer of JonBenet Ramsey was a family member. We will probably never know which family member, but none of the physical evidence actually matches an intruder. The garrote tracks with John's sailing knotting. The ransom note tracks with Patsy's pill addiction. Probably wrote it with her left hand. Burke on doctor. Phil smiling the whole time. Everyone knows somebody in that house did it. The way they completely f***ed up the crime scene in the initial hours is wild. Planned obsolescence. Our products are designed to break or wear out before it's necessary, with the best engineering and production techniques, in order to create more sales. The Phoebus Cartel was an international organization which controlled light bulb sales worldwide and made sure they wouldn't last more than like 2,000 hours. The engineers actually had more difficulty accomplishing this than they had creating a better light bulb. The Centennial light has allegedly been burning for 121 years. Oh, guess what? It's not just light bulbs, and it hasn't stopped whatsoever. That it was Iraq involved in 9/11. We know they weren't, and the hijackers were all from Saudi Arabia. Had to scroll too far for this LOL, and the cover-ups and secrecy most likely lead to the even stranger beliefs surrounding it. People filled in the gaps with things like they demoed the towers. There is no great answer to why the Saudis group planned it, though. Maybe another from the time would be weapons of mass destruction. It would be conspiratorial thinking if you disagreed, but we invaded and never found evidence of them. I'm not sure if this is really a conspiracy theory, but more of confirming what had always been known. But the treatment and the number of deaths within the Mother and Baby Homes Institution in Ireland. For those unaware, it was common for unmarried pregnant women to be sent to mother and baby homes, often by their own family, to deliver their child and remain in the home for a period of time determined by the nuns, working for free to reimburse the church for service rendered, aka having their child taken from them, never knowing what happens to them, and often having their child put up for adoption without their consent or knowledge. This all came to light when an unmarked massive grave containing the remains of 800 children was made public. I was shocked that people were shocked Lance Armstrong was taking PEDs, so guess it was a conspiracy. I was a conspiracy theorist who just thought it was a well-known fact, but it wasn't. They all do drugs. Our roided out guy beat yours. Get over it. Bill Burr. My problem is that it was all pinned on Lance, as if no one else was involved or responsible. Like, Lance himself was injecting his competition. It didn't help that he was an ass about the whole thing, but still, as soon as it was all hung around his neck, a bunch of others quietly came out and admitted they were doping too. And no one cared, because Lance the Big Bad was the real baddie, and I do not think it has stopped, or at least stopped after that. The Schleck brothers dropping off right then, Contador's tainted meat. Part of me wants to just say, screw it, you can't stop it, let's see how fast a human can go. They are doing it anyways. It gets crazier. The Spanish police raided his doctor's home. They found all of the Spanish national team, soccer/football, who were world champions and dominant at the time, and Barcelona, including Lionel Messi, who were also in their most dominant period winning the Champions League twice. All of the players' names had the same symbols next to their names on a list that the bike riders who were doped by the same guy had, and the Spanish judge ordered it destroyed because there was no search warrant used. The government was stealing dead bodies to do radioactive testing. During Prohibition, the government poisoned alcohol to keep people from drinking. A stroke rendered President Woodrow Wilson incapable of governing, and his wife surreptitiously stepped in, but pretended he was fine. The CIA was testing LSD and other hallucinogenic drugs on Americans in a top-secret experiment on behavior modification. The Dalai Lama is a CIA agent. The FBI was spying on former Beatle John Lennon. With the advances in technology, the government is using its vast resources to track citizens. Yes, your government spies on you. For decades, tobacco companies buried evidence that smoking is deadly. The Gulf of Tonkin incident on August 2, 1964, was faked to provoke American support for the Vietnam War. The CIA embeds agents in the media to manipulate the masses. I hadn't heard the Dalai Lama one. Is the theory that he's a CIA agent or a CIA asset? I'd believe asset, no problem. Or is the idea that he secretly died a long time ago and Langley somehow slipped in a duplicate to make sure that whatever geopolitical crisis ensues upon his death happens on the CIA's time frame? Atari dumped a bunch of unsold games into a landfill in New Mexico. Even former employees of Atari constantly denied it, but it was actually revealed to be true around 2014. Operation Snow White. Church of Scientology infiltrated the IRS to ensure their tax exemption. The sugar industry painted fat as the culprit behind all heart disease and obesity. Sadly, they're still getting away with it for the most part. They literally created the modern Western diet and ingrained, no pun intended, the belief that sugars and somehow starches, quickly converted to sugar then excess to body fat, are cool. But naturally occurring, fat is not. Anyone seen the food pyramid many generations grew up learning? The most shocking to me is the CIA infecting people in South America with syphilis. Let's add the 40-year Tuskegee syphilis study that ended in 1972 to the list. In the study, investigators enrolled a total of 600 impoverished African American male sharecroppers from Macon County, Alabama, with syphilis to observe the effects of the disease when untreated. By the end of the study, medical advancements meant it was entirely treatable, but not given to participants. After funding for treatment was lost, the study was continued without informing the men that they would never be treated. None of the infected men were treated with penicillin, despite the fact that by 1947, the antibiotic was widely available and had become the standard treatment for syphilis. So, for 25 years, they just let people progress through syphilis. In my opinion, it is part of the background to the anti-vax movement in African American communities. There's a massive Italian-American crime syndicate that stretches from coast to coast, and Hoover knows about it, but they have dirt on him, so the FBI won't even admit they exist. He literally denied it up until he couldn't anymore. The guy who headed what would become the DEA, Anslinger, had identified Cosa Nostra decades before Hoover acknowledged it and was ignored / laughed at. Thank you for watching. Write comments, put likes. Do not forget to watch other videos.